Hello, I hope you're well. I've been asked by a couple of my colleagues or trainees to talk a little bit about the theory of convergence. This is a theory that is very useful to understand how illicit networks operate within our contemporary environment. Um, and I'm going to explain a little bit about it. Now, what is convergence? Convergence is really bad people getting together, no matter what their line of illicit business is or their motivators are, and they conglomerate together in order to maximize their operational capability, what they do to become more efficient. Back in 2000, there was a book published by Jeffrey Robinson, very nice book called The Merger. And this is one of the first books that started talking on how illicit networks, criminal organizations, terrorists, the devil, whoever, started getting together to operate, and how they created alliances that became so powerful that they can outmaneuver many governments, right? Also, there's a very important publication that came out in 2013 called Convergence, and it has a subtitle called Convergence and the National Security in the Age of Globalization. This was made by Michael McCloskey and Jacqueline Brewer. They were working for some institutions related with the United States Department of Defense. And this document, which you can find on PDF by just searching online, is very useful to understand what's going on today and what are the threats that we are challenged with. So, convergence, what is it? I'm going to explain it historically. If you go back 40 years ago and you were a terrorist, that's what you were, a terrorist, and you did only terrible terrorist things, okay? And you operated within the community of terrorists, that's it, and you did your things. If you were a criminal organization, you were some sort of mafia group that had very little relationship with terrorists or, let's say, bad countries or whatever. You were a criminal organization that had minimum exposure or connection with other organizations. And you did whatever crime you did in order to obtain profit. If you were an insurgent, that's all you were, an insurgent. Sometimes you received money or you were state sponsored, but your social associations, your connections, your network was really reduced. Now, that's 40 years ago. If you were a member of FARC, the Colombian terrorist insurgent group, that's what you were, just that. And you might have related yourself with other left-wing insurgent groups. Now, things change nowadays. Criminal networks, illicit networks, are forming alliances. FARC, for many years, until a couple of years ago, was not only an insurgent group operating in Colombia and sometimes in Venezuela with the sponsorship of the Venezuelan government, but also got involved in drug trade. Now, they became narco criminals, right? Or insurgent criminals, whatever the label you wanted to have on them. Then you have groups that are terrorist groups, like, let's say, Hezbollah, very important group, right, that we all have heard about. Well, they do business with many people, with many criminal organizations. They're not isolated. They interact with all kinds of criminals, governments, whoever is going to favor their purpose. Now, if you talk about drug traffickers, they get involved with terrorists or they get involved with other countries. For example, some drug trafficking organizations are related to the government of Honduras, officials of the government of Honduras, or definitely Venezuela, right? The Venezuelan regime right now under the Chavez Maduro group, well, they need money. And they're making money off of drug trade. So why is all of this happening? Why are these groups colluding? Why are they mixing up, becoming conglomerates? And it's a lot more complicated than what I'm explaining. Well, there's a couple of historical and circumstances that created it. First of all, the fall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell back in the early 90s, immediately we had a whole new market available for all the legitimate world, right, or legitimate business. So there's all kinds of new markets. But these new markets are not only open to legitimate businesses, they're open to criminal enterprises. So that's one thing. The fall of the Soviet Union. Now, when the Soviet Union falls, something else happens. A lot of illicit networks, especially insurgent or terrorist groups that were under the realm of Marxism-Leninism, lost their funding. So guess what? They need money. And that's the case of FARC, Shining Path, whoever is out there still doing communist things via violence. Well, they learn that there are illicit markets out there, and they start making business or breaking deals or offering services to very organized criminal entities, and they start making money, right? So the fall of the Soviet Union is something very important. Then we have the revolution of transportation. Right now, it's very inexpensive to travel as a person or to ship products via airways or shipping through boats and ships and all of that stuff. So there's a great revolution that makes it easy for people to move themselves or to move goods. At the same time, we have another revolution that most of us have been part of, have been participants, and that's the revolution of communications. Telecommunications, from phone to computing and the internet and emails and all of that stuff. Now we have instant, very cheap or almost free communications worldwide. So that's a second set of circumstances. Revolution in transportation, revolution in telecommunications. So you can travel and communicate very easily at very low prices. It's not difficult anymore. Then we have something else that has developed, and it's the global markets, which I mentioned a little bit with the fall of the Soviet Union. We have this phenomena of globalization. Well, we are in an age that represents perfectly well what a very interesting scholar from the 60s, a Canadian, Marshall McLuhan, spoke about, and that's called the global village. We certainly live in a global village. As a person, we can practically go anywhere, do anything if we have the funds, right? And we can know instantly what's happening in Zimbabwe or in Antarctica, even in the moon, right? We could go to Zimbabwe if we have the sources, but it's not something that is very difficult. So we have these contexts: revolution of transportation and communications, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the revolution of telecommunications and the internet. All of that has facilitated illicit networks: terrorists, narco-terrorists, drug traffickers, wildlife traffickers, whatever, bad person or entity, to do business. And the interesting thing is that they're getting together, and when they get together, and here's the tragedy, sometimes they have more power than many countries out there. So we have very powerful criminal and illicit organizations or illicit networks that can outmaneuver the capabilities, the enforcement or national security and defense capabilities of many, many countries. And it's not limited to that. Illicit networks, which are very well funded and are not restricted by jurisdiction or external ethic codes or laws, they have so many resources and so much clarity of vision that they are starting to invest heavily into politics. There's a term out there called state capture, and that's when illicit networks take over the government and start having effect on the formulation of public policy. So the threats we have nowadays due to convergence are gigantic, are existential in many cases. You can see the specific cases of corruption and criminality that are affecting the quality of life and even the social contract, which is the foundation of many countries, their body politic, that are threatened, like Mexico, Somalia, you have Afghanistan, Russia nowadays, right? You have South Africa, Honduras, terribly taken over by criminal organizations, and a few other countries. So these groups are becoming very powerful. So powerful that they're taking over the duties of formulation of public policy. So convergence is really, bringing it down to a nutshell, the conglomerate of illicit networks that get together to do business. To satisfy each one of their needs, they form strategic alliances, and they can outclass, outmaneuver, and outfunded than most enforcement agencies and national security apparatuses around the world. And it's a very big threat. If you are somebody who's working in the intelligence community, in the anti-money laundering community, in the law enforcement or national security community, it can become very useful to understand what the theory of convergence is. It's going to permit you contextualize and understand the underground of currents that enable all of this threat activity, illicit networks, criminal organizations operate. And I think it's a professional imperative to know about convergence. It's a very interesting theory to look into. Bad people have more power than those who are bound by ethics and law. As General McChrystal said once, it takes one network to bring down another one. I have a caller rally. I have my own version. It takes a bigger network to bring down a smaller network. And now we need consistency in modes of operation and laws and the capabilities to bring down bad people. But there has to be a consistency globally. You can't have just Europe, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, the G7 countries, the G8, Australia, Japan, doing the right thing if the rest of the world just offers, capabilities for bad people to operate. And that's why they can win. They can win. And the bad people, they're taking advantage of the global situation right now to consolidate their power base and keep extracting resources as they consider fit. What law enforcement and national security agencies are able to do globally is really not having the greatest impact against threat networks. We focus a lot on terrorism, of course, we do, but we have illicit wildlife trafficking, human trafficking. We have not only drugs, everybody is infatuated with drugs and Pablo Escobar, but no, there's a lot of bad organizations there. Pirates who steal intellectual property. We have state-sponsored things that are bad. We have all kinds of bad things, and you're going to understand them well if you really understand what the theory of convergence is. So, just a very informal talk for those who want to hear about it. Thank you. Take care. Be well, and let's build a better place. Bye-bye.